Their solution is, as a white liberal, well, let me take credit for helping them progress. DEI is the solution because then I'm going to be the shining example of how they progress. So even if I progress without DEI, they get credit. And if I progress with DEI, they get credit. And if we don't progress, they're going to say, see, that's proof we're not doing enough.
Well, hi again, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Narrative. Mike Andrews and Bob the Builder, a.k.a. David Mahan, who's in a full-on construction zone this morning. Literally have been jackhammering as we've attempted to get today's podcast recorded. So might be a little extraneous background noise, but wanted to let you folks know about that off the top. But it's been watch this, David. It's been a constructive week at CCB in many ways, with the budget process going on, and I know you were busy testifying on a couple of bills. So let's start there. One of the bills you testified on this week is the Innocence Act, which I think is relatively familiar to our listeners at this point because it was something that was moving last General Assembly, and we've touched on it a little bit this time. But just as a quick refresher, what's going on with the Innocence Act in the State House right now?
Yeah, last GA, if you remember, it was HB 295 this year. This General Assembly is HB 84. Demetrio and our guest that you're about to hear, Rep. Williams, is on that bill. It's got some bipartisan support this time. There's 3 Democrats on the bill. This General Assembly, which it should be all across the country, is probably, this age verification for pornographic websites and things like this. This is probably the most bipartisan bill in the country. I had some good questions come up. I testified on the bill, I think it was Tuesday. Had a great question from a Democrat, who was genuinely wanting to protect children from this addiction for profit industry. And we saw some good traction happening here. The committee seems to be very interested on both sides of the aisle, and I would expect that this passes the House, gets to the floor of the House, passes, and gets over to the Senate pretty quick. There was a double header that day. I also had to go and stand before the dope dealers over in the Senate.
Your favorite people.
It was literally like Will from the Catholic Conference, me from Center for Christian Virtue, and then the white collar dope dealers all behind me. And it's always hilarious. I always watch the footage on Ohio Channel when I testify over there, because as soon as I say addiction for profit industry run by white collar dope dealers, they all crack up because they know it's true. But Chairman, but this was on intoxicating hemp. So, generally we're talking about, marijuana, we're talking about medical marijuana, adult use marijuana. This time we're talking about intoxicating hemp or hemp-derived high-potency THC products. And because these products, which really, when you put it through the chemical processes that they do, the hemp becomes high-potency THC product. But the difference is it's not regulated to the same extent that adult use marijuana is. So literally you could get a Delta 8 product and in a convenience store or a gas station without any age or advertising regulations attached. And so it looks like we're going to be able to get that shut down. But it was just a great opportunity to, we've been talking about needing a new brain trust, right? In the Senate and in the House. And it was a good opportunity to educate the Senate on high potency THC and to the fact that we're not just talking about a gateway drug in marijuana. We're talking about a drug that is the #1 identified substance in completed teen suicides in the state of Colorado, twice as much as alcohol. And so that really shook a lot of them. And I had, thankfully, we had just done a podcast with Dr. Ken Finn, who advises state legislatures all across the country, as well as the United Nations. And the chair of that committee, Rogner, literally said, where can we hear more about this podcast? And it was already right there in my testimony. So hopefully we'll be getting some hits from the state legislature on that podcast.
Love the way that you're promoting the podcast at the GA. We need to bump our numbers up. So I appreciate that. But
shameless plug.
That's also such an important conversation. And I do want to say, go back and listen to the episode with Dr. Ken Finn if you haven't heard it already. But just from the necessity of the bill, David, I don't think a lot of people really understand the kind of offshoots of marijuana that this bill is dealing with. Like there's so much more than just the traditional, joints or those types of things that have kind of slipped through the cracks. And grateful that the GA has taken action on this to try and shut some of that down. I do want to jump back to the Innocence Act real quick and ask you, what's it like running a bill or working on a bill that actually has some bipartisan support? I don't think that's happened a lot at CCB.
It is. It's amazing. And you know what? I do have favor. When I speak and testify over there, I tend to get a lot of good questions and feedback from Democrats. And I think it's because we honor them, right? I include them. Like I call them when we have different reports and things that come out. I call certain ones of them. And I say, hey, I want you to know what's going on. When they give good feedback on the floor, I text them and say, hey, I really appreciated what you said there. There's a lot of that carries a lot of weight with me. But I think we're seeing some bipartisanship on the marijuana this side of the recreational ballot initiative, the adult use ballot initiative. Because it's like, okay, we want to give the dope dealers what they want. And so now it's okay for us to talk about prevention, right? So we're going to, completely release the hounds on $1 billion industry to just wreak havoc in our state. And now we're all going to come together, kumbaya, to give $5 million in prevention. It's stupid. It's sickening. But I'll take the bipartisan wins. We are where we are.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And last thing I wanted to ask you during our news segment here is we're coming up on a pretty important point in the budgeting process, budget season. They've got to kind of get everything in and lined up in order to have this passed by I think it's the end of June, right? So what's been going on with that and what should we be keeping an eye on?
Excuse me, Mike. Man, would y'all cut that out? All right, sorry. The jackhammer is getting on my. So
you're gonna have a fun day in the office.
We are in the middle of the budget. What the process is: the governor sends his budget over to the state legislature, then it goes to the House. The House goes through their deliberations. Everybody can come before the Finance Committee, and then each different committees. So today, the Education Committee is going before the Finance Committee to kind of plead their case for budget amendments to the governor's budget. And so they'll probably wrap that process up. They'll be working all through the weekend to have something to vote on probably within the next week or two. And then it will go to the Senate. Right. So the early part of April, generally the Senate gets it and they take their run at it. And then by, like you said, the end of June, typically we have to have something that is voted on for fiscal year 26, 27. And so there are, one representative I talked to yesterday, she said there's like 60 different amendments that she's submitting alone. Right. And so from the CCV standpoint of things, we have to make sure that, one, we are connecting with the Finance Committee folks that literally are just sitting in a room going through hundreds of amendments and saying, hey, what about this one? What about this one? And based on the relationships that folks have with that committee to some large extent and how many folks from the caucus submit or support that amendment, that's what determines what goes through. And so right now it's a very busy time for us, making sure that our amendments, our priorities are at the top of the stack for all these members.
Yeah, and it's not always about getting good stuff in. Sometimes you got to keep an eye on the bad stuff that that might sneak through the cracks too, and see if there's anything you can do to prevent that as well. Well, we're gonna get to our conversation now with Representative Josh Williams. David, you and I were talking after we wrapped the convo with him, and we called this podcast The Narrative because we want to break through the script, break away from the script that you hear. There's a script on the left with DEI, there's a script on the right with DEI, and Josh Williams' conversation really cuts right down the middle of that, and I think gives some great perspective to really understand why things like Senate Bill 1 are needed, and why there's a more nuanced way to have the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation.
And I'll just add this to the narrative family out there. If I encourage you to watch the 3 hour. It was 3 hours, but just put it on 1.5 speed or whatever. But there was a lot of good back and forth about SB1. But as you get towards the end, you really get to hear some heartfelt experiences from both the left and the right. And those experiences and those discussions are the same discussions that need to be happening about race and culture in our college classrooms. And SB1 does nothing to stop those conversations. Those are important conversations. They're beneficial. And our next guest did a phenomenal job of reining that all in and directing the conversation to, yes, we have issues in America. We have issues regarding race in society, but DEI does not solve them, and it probably exacerbates them in the end.
Well, our conversation with Representative Josh Williams is coming up next on The Narrative.
Hey, Narrative listeners. Christians in the marketplace today face more unique and challenging threats than ever before. Businesses are following woke capitalism, chambers of commerce are beholden to social justice, and secular activists are chipping away Christians' First Amendment rights. As Ohio's only Christian chamber of commerce, the Christian Business Partnership stands in the gap to advocate for, to educate, and to celebrate Christian business owners. Joining the partnership also allows businesses to provide their employees with healthcare insurance, workers' compensation, and exclusive banking and educational discounts. To find out more and to join, go to cbpohio.org. That's cbpohio.org.
Welcome back to The Narrative. Mike Andrews, David Mahan, and we're joined now by State Representative Josh Williams, who serves the 44th District of Sylvania Township. Got a great story. After dropping out of high school, he went to work to support his young son. He was hurt on the job after a fall of 30 feet and was disabled for 6 years because of a serious back injury. Then after getting his GED, Josh started college at the age of 30. And by the time he was 35, he graduated from the University of Toledo College of Law with his JD. Josh decided to give back and help shape youth by teaching at Adrian College, and he currently teaches constitutional law, and criminal procedure in the undergraduate criminal justice programs. And he is running some great bills at the State House right now at the start of this new General Assembly. And Representative Williams, it is so great and an honor to have you here on The Narrative with us today.
Thank you guys for having me on today.
Rep. Williams, I very, very grateful and honored that you would take the time, right? I've been hearing that you've been burning the midnight oil, literally, on finance over there. And everybody over there wants you on their bill for some reason, and you have a problem, I guess, of saying no. So you have very little time, and I thank you for spending some with us this morning. I know that Mike read your bio, but kind of give us a little breakdown of your journey, to being the first Black member of the House of Representatives in 50 years. How did that happen?
Well, long history. I'll give you the elevator version, and then if you want a longer version, I can always give it. So I was born and raised in Toledo, Ohio. My dad was 68 when I was born. My mom was 26. My dad's a Black reverend from Tunica, Mississippi. Grew up in the Jim Crow South. My mom is half Native American and white. Her family's from French. They're French Canadian. Migrated down through Michigan to Toledo. My dad died when I was young, so I was raised by a single mom in poverty in the inner city of Toledo. Eventually made our way out to the west side of Toledo by the University of Toledo. I kind of excelled once I got out there in a multicultural environment. Dropped out of high school, though, when I became homeless as a senior. Struggled a little bit thereafter. Met the mother of my son, my ex-wife. She got pregnant with my son. I started working at the railroad as a subcontractor. At the age of 21, I fell 30 feet and destroyed my spine. By 23, I was fully disabled and bedridden. I had about 40 plus procedures on my spine. I blew up to like 458 pounds at my heaviest in 2009, 2010. Eventually, I had some good surgeries in Cleveland, started to get healthy, had weight loss surgery, lost the weight, fought to be able to go to college as an injured worker, entered college at the age of 30. 5 years later, graduated with my Juris Doctorate. I have an associate's, I have a bachelor's, graduated magna cum laude, full scholarship to UT Law, graduated a semester early from UT Law, started teaching, started practicing law. Kind of felt a hole in my heart that, I didn't feel like that was a path that God had intended for me. Started praying about what assignment he had for me. And he started demonstrating through the people he placed in my life that he had, a bigger assignment for me. And that's how I ended up considering running to go into the state legislature, make some changes. And we ran in 2021, won our election in 2022, got sworn in 2023 as the first Black Republican in the House in over 50 years, worked my butt off for 2 years, introducing the most amount of bills out of any Republican in the House. And then I guess that convinced my colleagues that I would be great in leadership. They had saw the hard work that I did, the arguments that I made on bills on the floor that were mine and other members, and they selected me for majority leadership. So now I serve as the first Black majority whip in Ohio's history, regardless of party affiliation or chamber. And it's truly just an honor to serve.
Yeah. And I kind of, hopefully we'll have some time to kind of, touch on, does it matter that you're the first Black in history to be on leadership in either house, in either chamber? And does it matter that you're the first Black in 50 years to be a part of the Republican caucus there? But we spent 3 hours yesterday talking about DEI, passed the Senate, then it came over to the House, and then you all spent 3 hours kind of hashing that out on the floor, which I thought was riveting. I saw some really good arguments being made on both sides, but more so than the arguments, it was just the heart that was coming forth from members of both chambers. Can you explain to our audience what is SB 1 and what are some of the changes that were made from the Senate version?
So from the Senate's version, we had 2 amendments that went in. One was one of the amendments that I talked about on the floor, protecting student groups, sororities, fraternities, making sure that those organizations can exist. We did not want to exclude like Black Student Union, Black fraternities, women's groups, things of that nature. So we did put a carve out through Speaker Pro Temp Gail Manning, who serves on higher education alongside me. That was her amendment. My amendment dealt with accreditations. We are hearing there are still accrediting agencies out here who are requiring DEI as part of their curriculum in order to maintain accreditation, such as like our social workers. So we did put a carve out that was previously already existing in Senate Bill 83 from the last General Assembly. I redrafted it and made it where a university president can apply for an exemption for a particular program if he demonstrates a need. And essentially supposed to try to seek out alternative accreditation and demonstrate that essentially that program would lose its accreditation before they're able to continue DEI programming. Those are the changes that came from the Senate. There's a couple main prefaces of the bill. The main issue is DEI. So it says that DEI cannot be used in admissions. That's based on Supreme Court case law now. DEI should not be used in hiring. That's case law for decades that you shouldn't consider race or gender when you're hiring or promoting someone. That's discrimination. It's outlawed by the 14th Amendment, and we shouldn't be doing it in this country. It also said that you can't require teachers to go through DEI training. We heard from a lot of professors that they were being forced to take DEI training that taught them they had implicit biases, they should treat minority students differently than non-minority students, things of that nature. So we removed all that DEI wokeness out of the classroom. We ensured something that's different than Senate Bill 81. We made sure we put in language that made it perfectly clear that this does not stop teachers and students from having open debate in the classroom so long as the teacher allows the student to demonstrate intellectual diversity, meaning you can't silence a student's position because you don't agree with it. We're not telling teachers how they have to teach. We're not telling them what they have to teach. We're not telling them what side of the subject you have to fall on. We're simply saying do not force a student to maintain or prescribe to a particular position in order to pass your course. That's different than teaching if an incident happened. But I'll give you an example. Teaching the Civil War as something that actually happened is not a problem. Saying that the only reason the Civil War existed is because of racism, that's not technically true. There was a lot of motivating factors. Racism may have been one of the greater factors, but to try to force a student to prescribe to that, knowing that there was other underlying conditions that led to the Civil War, that would be not only disingenuous, but forcing a student to prescribe to a particular viewpoint. That was the largest part of the bill. Another section there's a lot of this debate about is the anti-strike provision that stops faculty from being able to, full-time faculty from being able to strike. We heard in committee, witnesses testified that they wanted this tool, their words, this tool of threatening a student's progression, their careers, their potential going to law school and med school. They wanted this threat of using the students as a tool in their negotiations in order to have a bargaining position that was stronger with the university. We don't believe our kids are tools. One witness called it a nuclear option. We don't believe that their education, their progression, their degrees should be something used as a tool in negotiations. That was the main portions of the bill that kind of caused contention. And then there's another section that even I don't agree with, and that had to do with minority-based scholarships. And that was scholarships based on any DEI criteria, race, gender, sexual orientation, sexuality, things of that nature. We've had long-standing minority-based scholarships for Black students because they were underrepresented. The Attorney General has a position that the admissions decision by the Supreme Court applies to scholarships. I disagree with the Attorney General. The benefit of both of us being lawyers is we can read the exact same paragraph and both have different interpretations of what it means. But he has already given instruction to the universities, and they are already starting to wind down these scholarships. So we did negotiate a clause that says if there is a current scholarship in existence, it can continue until it runs out of money, and then it shall cease to exist. And then no new DEI-related scholarships. We believe the same objectives can be met without mentioning race or sex, or you can use a third party. There's nothing stopping minority alumni getting together as a group and giving a scholarship directly to a minority student. There's nothing that stops that from occurring. The school just cannot be a participant because that's state action and violates the 14th Amendment.
And Representative, even from the state level, I mean, because the argument is, why don't you want to help Black folks? Why don't you want to help disadvantaged kids, regardless of race? And there are ways that you can help them, even at a state level, even at a scholarship and a grant level, without the race-based, piece of it. So what are some examples of how we could still work with disadvantaged kids to make sure that, and underrepresented kids, to make sure that they get to college as well?
That's a great point. And I talked about it a little bit on the floor, is that you can negotiate the language of a scholarship to target groups that disproportionately are Black. So if you give a scholarship to first generation college students who come from a single parent household, who live under a certain income threshold and live in the inner city, over 90% of the applicants are going to be Black. Like, that's just a fact of the byproduct of what our society has produced to this point. So you can do that. Now, you can take that same scholarship and go down to Appalachia and add a condition that you must be from these counties of Ohio, and you're going to pick up more white applicants because they've also lived through poverty and single parent households and first generation. So it just depends on how you target it to what you want to produce. But you can't say white or Black. You can't say Native American. You can't say male or female. You can't say gay or straight. Now, outside organizations can do that, but the state of Ohio is not allowed to do that. Our universities that we're affecting with this bill are state universities and community colleges. So those are the ones that you can get to the same a degree. And I talked about it before. So I received a scholarship in law school. it's one of my lifelong regrets, but I earned a full academic scholarship to UT Law. 2 weeks before I was to start law school, admissions took me into a room and wanted me to take what's known as the LEOG grant, a legal equal opportunity grant. It's intended for underrepresented groups. That's all the statute says. It was created by the legislature. It doesn't say race, it doesn't say gender, and the admissions department are the ones that administer it and can come up with the criteria. And their criteria was almost identical to what I just said. You had to be from these underrepresented groups, but they considered those based on first generation college students, single parent household, low income, inner city. And I qualified. Now, many of my colleagues saw that as a black only scholarship and started to demonize me on campus. And they assumed that I was only there because of DEI. But I came in with a 3.85 GPA, which was in the 80 percentile of my class. I scored really good on the LSAT. I was in the top 75 percentile of my class. But they assumed the only reason I was there was because of my race, and they started to treat me accordingly. And I mean, when there's only one or two of us out of 99 kids in a class, and you have a scholarship that's being advertised as guided towards minorities, you start to assume that I don't meet the qualifications. Like I had to show them I graduated magna cum laude. You barely have a 3.0. But the assumption was there. So that's how, when the government participates in DEI, they can actually reinforce racial stereotypes from an institutional level.
Yeah. And no offense, Mike, for the underperformers on the podcast. But so while we were in, I was watching the back and forth, the banner back and forth. And I did. Again, I really heard some heartfelt stories. And it's interesting. I was talking to another state rep yesterday. A lot of we were talking about slavery yesterday. We were talking about racism. We were talking about, disparities. But it was okay. It was like, this is the kind of debate we need to be having on college campuses, in college classrooms. Is there anything in this law that would prohibit the kind of debate that was going on the House floor a couple of days ago from going on in the classroom?
Absolutely not. So there was accusations we're trying to remove Black history. Not true. We wanted to erase discussions about Jim Crow. Not true. We specifically left in language that said these type of debates need to be had. The difference is we want the open and honest intellectual debate. You can't have a debate where you start with one argument is not permitted. One discussion is not permitted. Some people just want to be educated on the topic, right? And what you saw on the floor was Black members from the Democrat side and the only Black member from the Republican side having a debate over whether or not we should give preferential treatment to minorities as a way of offsetting past oppression or our history of the government being involved in our downfall. And there's going to be another anti-DEI bill. I'm a joint sponsor on it. I'm carrying the bill in the House. There's going to be another debate on the floor when it gets there. And that one's going to be I'm going to max out my 15-minute time educating my colleagues on why DEI is a bad idea. But what I saw on the floor, well, one thing is interesting to note, Dave, is no one this time around openly said we were racist for doing it. I've seen that before. You've seen it before.
Yeah.
Where they openly say this is driven by racism. See, they can't say that anymore because I'm standing there defending my caucus. But they'll do it in a soft way. They'll say, you're trying to remove my identity. You're trying to remove my history. You're trying to remove my ancestry.
Erase my experience.
Yeah, erase my experience, right? And I appreciate every one of my Black colleagues that stood up and spoke about their experience, and all of my white Republican colleagues sat there and listened. But when I got up as a Black Republican talking about my experience being raised by a single mom and pop, what did you see happen? A Black Democrat stood up and asked the speaker to shut me up.
That's right.
Because he's talking about his personal journey. As soon as I was demonstrating that those struggles are not isolated to the Democrat Party, they tried to silence me. That part of the debate was not going to be permitted on the floor. And
Because
kudos
you
to me.
started talking about how you are fully acquainted with racism, the neighborhood you grew up in, but even racism in your own family. Could you kind of hit on that a little bit?
Yeah, so half my family's racist. I mean, my name was changed at the age of 3 from Lavoy to Williams to my father's last name. My mom's side of the family is known to be racist. My mom used to tell us stories, and we thought she was crazy. When she was telling me she ran away from home as a teenager because she had a black son and they wouldn't let my older brother Jason eat at the dinner table. That Tyler wasn't allowed to leave her bedroom because he was black. That her family ostracized her because she had 3 black children, while her sister had 1 black child and then a white child, and they forgave her for making a mistake of having 1 black child. Like, I heard all these stories growing up, and I said, man, that cannot be true. So when we found out our grandfather, a full-blooded Native American, was on his deathbed, we tried to go and visit him. I never met the man. And we went to his house and knocked on the door and nobody answered. And we went to the house next door that sat back about 100 yards from the street, and we knocked on that door and nobody answered. And when my 2 brothers and I walked back to the vehicle, what I now know is one of my aunts and her husband stepped out on the porch and said, "What do you guys want?" And we said, "We're Eva's sons. We were looking for our grandfather." And they met us in the middle of the field. And they're talking to us. And they're like, "Well, we haven't seen Eva since she ran away and this and that." And I remember my aunt saying, "Well, it looks like she did a good job raising you guys because I don't see you with your pants sagging and having gang colors." And we all looked at each other and we were like, did she just seriously say that? We let it go. No confrontation. We went back to the car. We said, "Tell our grandfather we said hi. We hope he's doing okay." By the time we got back home, 15 minutes later, our aunt, the aunt that has a black child, called from Hawaii and said, "My sister called me and said that Dad, my grandfather, said if those N-words ever step foot on his front porch again, he'll shoot them dead with a shotgun." This was my biological grandfather. He was full-blooded racist. And we have a long history of abuse in that family. And my mom, I don't like to tell part of her story. She told me not to tell everything until she's dead and gone. But I mean, she went through hell and back in that family. Like, her story's more amazing than mine, in and out of an orphanage, dealing with all kind of abuse at home and running away from home as a young teenage mom with a black son, moving to Toledo. Like, her
So,
story's great.
so Rep, your argument is not that somehow racism got erased from the heart of sinful man, and therefore we don't need DEI, right? Your argument is that, yeah, racism exists, but DEI is not the solution.
Yeah.
Right. Matter of fact, based on what you were saying, DEI may be exacerbating the problem to the point where you said it is offensive to you.
Yeah.
You broke down diversity, you broke down equity for the caucus, and that I think that impacted a lot in the room. Could you do that for our audience? What is diversity and what is equity in relation to DEI?
Yeah, so diversity for me, it's important, but it can't be mandated. So diversity means something because diversity can help break down racial stereotypes, so long as it is honest diversity. So me going through all of my struggles, overcoming adversity and getting to where I am, me being in the room when discussions are being made and younger Ohioans looking at me on the floor in the position that I am, that can make them strive and believe that they could reach those potentials as well, so long as I got there off of my merit, right? But DEI, the diversity in DEI is that we are going to mandate diversity, that even if someone is not qualified to be in that position, we're going to give the position to them because the image of them being in that position benefits us as a whole. And the image of them there through mandatory diversity actually hurts us because then the assumptions become the only reason you're there is because the government placed you there. And it's being pushed. And I didn't talk about this that much until the end, and I ran out of time. The DEI is being pushed by the left. And it's very interesting, right? Is that we look at racism as the cause of Black individuals being underrepresented and unprepared, as the only cause. We don't look at the destruction of the nuclear Black family. We don't look at rap music's promotion of drug dealing and single motherhood and thoughtism as anything that's harmful to the Black community, resulting in single motherhood rate way over our peers at 70%, right? Or this societal impact that can have on it that's not rooted in racism. There's so many layers to why our community is behind. It's not just racism. And even if it was racism, the solution is not reverse racism, because it's just going to reinforce these racial stereotypes that are there. And it's funny that it's being pushed by the left, and I'll be more specific. It's funny that it's being pushed by the white liberal left, the same group of Southern Democrats that used to own our bodies. Then afterwards, when we were free, tried to keep us from total integration, and the Republicans had to come to our save, to save us through the Civil Rights Act that had Republicans voting for it, an Emancipation Proclamation through a Republican. The same people that put us in bondage and oppressed us, now that we have been forcibly integrated into society, now they want to somehow turn the wheels back and take ownership of our progression. So now they want the idea that if you're in the room, if you're in the position, they can take credit for it. See, the reason you're there is because of DEI. They think that's a benefit to them at as a harm to us, right? We're the victims of their DEI policies. And then equity is the most offensive one, because it stands for the proposition that the racial breakdown, the gender breakdown of our country should be representative of every group. Meaning, if there's a boardroom with 100 members, 13 of them should be Black, because the US population is at 13%. Right? This idea that even if only 5 people are qualified to be there, we want to fill in the blanks with underqualified people because we benefit from the representation more than the qualifications that need to be obtained. See, for me, equity just provides an eraser to the whiteboard of society that the systems that have been put in place have left us underprivileged. And I don't know about you, but I'm not willing to give an eraser to the white liberal whose policies have resulted in my community being underrepresented and unprepared. I'm not going to give you that eraser so you can whitewash the fact that you are not educating Black youth at the levels of their white peers, but then you give them a boost in admission to college, which resulted in what's known as mismatched. Unqualified students going to the wrong university. It resulted in higher dropout rates, resulted in higher transfers into other degree programs because they couldn't meet the qualifications and were unqualified. We've seen study after study after study about why DEI was wrong for admissions, and that is across the board why DEI is wrong for society. It's harmful. And I'm not going to give an eraser to the white liberal so they can whitewash their hands from the stain of their policies that have resulted in Black communities being underrepresented. Because before DEI ever came along, before the civil rights movement ever came along, we had higher rates of 2-parent married Black households. We had higher rates of home ownership. We had higher rates of money in savings accounts. We had higher rates of good family units. We had higher rates of literacy. We had higher rates of math proficiency. And I'm not knocking the civil rights movement, but after the civil rights movement, there was definitive actions by the federal government to dissolve the nuclear Black family, the 2-parent Black household, even the federal policies that were put in place that intentionally dissolved the nuclear Black family. That started the demise of us, taking the dad out of the household and making the mom reliant on public assistance, right? Our child support policies that incentivizes single motherhood, right? It incentivizes having 3 kids by 3 different baby daddies because you get more money in child support for each one of the kids. There's policies that have led to our demise, and instead of trying to fix the policies, their solution is, as a white liberal, well, let me take credit for helping them progress. DEI is the solution, because then I'm going to be the shining example of how they progress. So even if I progress without DEI, they get credit. And if I progress with DEI, they get credit. And if we don't progress, they're going to say, see, that's proof we're not doing enough.
Yeah, that's a really great perspective, Representative Williams, because I think I've always viewed DEI kind of a hammer that's looking for a nail. But when you put it in those terms, you can kind of see the roots a lot more easy of what's going on and why this is being pushed so much. I'm curious if you've got an opinion on why there's no consideration of merit, or why the people pushing DEI seem to be averse to merit and actually earning your seat at the table, instead of just having it handed to you for the sake of those quotas, or for that representation that you're talking about.
Yeah, because their policies are not guided towards gaining socioeconomic growth for the Black individual. They understand the studies that have shown the higher your income, the higher your degree in an actual profession that produces income, the more likely you are to become an independent voter who starts voting on things like property taxes, income tax, protection of the family, good education, compared to them being able every 4 years to threaten to take your benefits away to get you to vote for a white liberal. So they want the progress, but they only want it based on their terms, because those that believe DEI helped them get the job will then reinforce the idea that DEI is necessary. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
If you honestly went in and fixed the inner city schools and went in and fixed the nuclear families inside of the Black communities and allowed them to progress naturally, what you see, there's two things that happen. One, you see the foundation of the civil rights movement may come back. The true Black empowerment movement, where we didn't need white liberals to do it. We were doing it ourselves. We were demanding change, right? There's always been this fear that if Black people ever gain true political power, that we would use it to reverse what happened and demonize white individuals, right? This call for reparations, and you need to figure out how you can offset your white privilege. There's always this idea that if we gain too much political power, right, we become a national security threat. And let me talk about something that we didn't talk about on the floor. If we honestly wanted to see greater representation in the boardroom and greater representation in the college classroom and in corporate America, where Black people made up a higher percentage, wouldn't you think we would then want more Black babies being born? Instead, we kill them in the womb, right? Over 20 million of us has died inside of the womb. If you wanted to see those numbers grow, you would actually promote marriage. You would actually promote two-parent households. You would actually promote good schools at the lower levels, primary school. You would promote good kindergarten classes and pre-K. You would promote good universities, and we would produce better candidates based off of merit. But if we gain that level of societal integration off of merit, then the white liberal doesn't get to take responsibility for our progress. Because if they allowed us to grow without owing them something, we may stop voting for them in the future.
This is crazy, man. I've been wanting to jump in like for the last 10 minutes, but they are literally jackhammering above my office to where I cannot say anything. They trying to shut me down too, right? You
So
made
they got my text that you were talking too much and I needed somebody to intervene so that I could jump in. I'm going to appreciate the construction crew.
You made a statement, Rep, that I know some of our listeners are not going to like because they're big Fox News fans. And you said, you believe that there's systemic racism, that there's systematic racism. And I've been saying that for years, that those that are talking about they don't believe in systemic racism, I'm like, well, have you heard of, what do you think about abortion? What do you think about Margaret Sanger and the eugenics movement, and how we only have 12% Black women, but they account for over 50% of the abortions? Do you think that they're trying to target Black women in the Black community? Oh, absolutely. Then you believe in systemic racism, right? So talk about that for a second.
Yeah, I mean, we even as Republicans, we can't deny that systemic and systematic racism exists. We know that there was actual systems put in place to oppress Black people. I mean, we saw it. We saw the Black laws, right? We saw the Jim Crow era. We saw Plessy versus Ferguson. We saw the laws and the institutions actually being put in place. So we can't deny that, right? And we also see systemic racism, which is that discrimination is just a byproduct of the naturally formed system, even though it wasn't intended for discrimination. But we could see that. Like I could show you, the food stamp programs, the Section 8 programs, the welfare programs that were put in place in the 1930s that was actually intended to benefit white individuals during the Depression was weaponized in the 1970s to start driving the man out of the household. But that was uniform. It wasn't discriminatory in its placement, but it had a disproportionate impact on us because by that time we had become overwhelmingly reliant on it in the inner cities. So you start to see the destruction of our family units, right? But to deny that is kind of also, in my opinion, as a Republican, to deny that you're kind of erasing the white liberals' guilt for what happened because they were the ones pushing those policies. The white Democrat was the one pushing those policies back in the day, not the Republican. And I know people believe in the big switch, but there wasn't, right? And I'm not going to give a pass to the white Democrat. I'm not going to give them a pass for what happened in the past. And I'm not going to give them an eraser so they can erase their blame and then make up for it and try to take credit for our progress. Instead, if we actually made that progress on our own, then diversity means something. Like when you see someone like the first Black president, the assumption wasn't that he got there because he was Black. We looked at someone that was a lawyer. We looked at his wife, who was a lawyer. We looked at the community work that he did, the progress that he made as a state legislator. We knew he got there based off of his merits. But then if you look at Kamala Harris, right, and you look at Jackson, Supreme Court Justice Jackson, if you look at those two Black women, the stain is always going to be on their career that they're only there because of DEI. And the answer is why? Is that because Biden openly said, I'm only looking for a female Black vice president. So you set the standard that no matter what, it was going to be a Black woman. Your options were limited because there wasn't any that large number of qualified candidates. And many would say that Harris wasn't qualified either. And Jackson, although she may be qualified for the position, there's always going to be a stain on her reputation that he said openly that he was looking for a Black female justice, right? The fact that you said it openly shows that they were DEI hires. I'm not saying that Jackson isn't qualified. I'm saying that people are going to be able to look at that court and say, see, well, she's only there based off of, those criteria instead of her merits. This is the problem with DEI as being the solution towards overcoming institutional and systemic and systematic racism. But what I mean by that is, see, I believe in systemic and systematic racism. And that is why when we have natural progression as Black people, it means more. See, my white colleague that was raised in a suburb in a two-parent household where his parents were doctors and lawyers, and he progressed to college and became a lawyer, his struggle was a little bit less, right? The left calls it white privilege. And I overcame all this adversity to get to the same place. I don't look at my colleague as though he didn't have to work as hard as me, but I know how hard I had to work. So when I hit adversity, I overcome it without breaking a stride because I had to. This isn't the first time I hit obstructions. This isn't the first time I hit obstacles, right? It means more to me that I was able to overcome that history.
It also could be considered privilege. You have a strength that many don't have.
Yeah.
And we didn't even go talk about my God privilege because I tell people that all the time. But I thank you for being on this podcast, not just because we can talk about SB1 and DEI, but I feel like there is a nuance that is being lost in the body of Christ when we adopt the language of either CNN or MSNBC instead of, pulling both sides of the team on the field. You got one side, you got the other side, and then you got the referees. We need to be the referees pulling both sides. So what does God say about this? What is his way of seeing this? And I thank you for that nuance today, because like I said, I'm against institutional DEI 100%. Thank you for the bill, but I'm also disgusted by the anti-DEI rhetoric of the very shallow anti-DEI rhetoric of the right that also wants to assume that we don't need this because there's no racism and everybody's colorblind. Not so. Thank you so much for your testimony.
Yeah, and if I could, Representative Williams, one final question for me. Yeah, I don't want to assume anything about your background, but it sure seems like demographically there are a lot of people who have been in a somewhat similar trajectory that haven't overcome, that have bought into this DEI mindset of they need to be handed something. So, what is it specifically where your story kind of doves into standing up and speaking out against DEI that makes you an outlier? Both in terms of just the General Assembly in general, but for people who have come out of the inner city and maybe bought into we need to be handed to something and just perpetuated the cycle of not being able to break out of those economic factors, economic and social factors.
Yeah, I think, and I'm being truthful here. I think it's my Christian faith and my true belief in my Lord and Savior. So I had a victimhood mindset for a long time when I was disabled. I laid in that bed and I'll be vulnerable. There was moments where I cursed Christ, right? I sat there and I'm like, dude, I'm doing everything right. I was volunteering in my community. I'm raising two stepkids that aren't mine. I'm treating them like they're my kids. I'm raising my son. I overcame being homeless and raised by a single mom and my mom having a learning disability and my dad dying from cancer. I overcame all of this. And then when I finally start progressing at 21, making $50,000 a year, raising a family, I fall and I get hurt. Those 2 years of laying in that bed consecutively, man, it weighed on me and it weighed on my faith. And in that moment, I almost committed suicide. And God sent in my minor child. He was supposed to be away with his mother. I wrote out my suicide note and I was ready to kill myself. And in that moment, God intervened. He spoke to my ex-wife and told her to leave my minor child behind, even though I hadn't picked him up or cared for him in over a year. I was bedridden at the time. And he walked in, he said he was hungry. And man, did that hit my spirit, that I was getting ready to leave this young boy to be raised by a single mother in poverty, just like my dad did when he passed away from cancer. And I was doing it voluntarily, knowing that it was a sin. And that point, God shifted my mind to be like, well, why can't I be the one? So I went from saying, why me to why not me? Why can't I overcome this? Why can't I go to college? And in the moment, I used to always, and I say this in some of my speeches, I used to always look at all these obstacles as weights that were on my ankles that, have been placed there, either by society or even in my faith. I believe God can intentionally place them there. And that it was attempting to drown me. Right. And I given up to that point. I was just willingly able to go underwater and end it. And now that I've overcome it, I realize that those were weights I honestly believe God placed in my life. But that was because he needed me to build strength, because the weights would eventually fall off. And he had an assignment for me that would take strong character, strong will, strong faith. And he built that in me. It was my free will whether or not I walked down that path, but he laid it for me. And he knew if I overcame it and I had appreciation for his presence in my life and the journey that I had gone through, that I would strive for the assignment that he had given me. And that's why I believe I'm sitting in this room right now. And that's why when people ask me what I'm doing next, I say, I don't know. I don't know what the next assignment is. I don't know if this assignment's even over. I pray about it. And I think that's where we're a little bit different, is I walk with the Lord with me in every room I go into. Whether I'm sitting here by myself, he's present. So when I get that criticism, when people say you shouldn't speak that truth because there's going to be repercussions, this lobbyist not going to donate to you, this voter's not going to vote for you, I don't care. I'm on an assignment that God gave me, not them. And I'm going to keep walking down that path. And I think that makes me a little bit different, to where I'm going to speak truth to power, whether or not it results in me getting reelected or not.
Yeah. Well, that's inspirational stuff. Thank you so much for the time today, Representative Williams. Keep up the great work for the great people of Ohio in your job as a state representative.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Narrative, presented by CCV and produced by Wessler Media. If you found today's episode insightful, leave us a review or rating and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. We're your hosts, Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and David Mahan, and we'll see you next time on The Narrative.